So good morning, everyone. We'll do a few aspirational things together at 11. We are about to arrive at the 5th lunar month, which the Tibetan Buddhists follow a lunar month. And the 5th month is the month within which there are a lot of holidays, holy days, attributed to the life of the Buddha, especially the 15th, the lunar full moon of the 5th lunar month is called Sagadawa, as is the whole month called Sagadawa. And I can't give you the etymology of that yet. But that is to mark his birth, enlightenment, and death. And so there are a lot of prayers and a lot of practices and a lot of worship that occurred during that month. And it occurred to me today to talk a little bit about inspiration. And the more I thought about it, the more interesting it became. So the first thing that while this is supposed to be a lecture, I'm not always a rule-bound individual. Do we have a microphone that can go around? So I want you to just look into your own experience of individuals who inspire you or events that have inspired you. And I think it's very, very important. Most of us live in our heads, whereas probably most of what we're actually doing is probably governed by our bodies, but we're not fully aware of that. So I'd like you to just recall somebody or something that was inspiring to you, and contemplate what was occurring in your body in response to the inspiration. And then also your mind, because that's, of course, very important. And I'm wondering if anybody would care to, first marinate with that a little bit. Just what does it mean to be inspired in your experience? What does inspiration really mean in your own experience? How does it impact you physically? How does it impact you in your mind? And see if you can bring some freshness to it, not just a kind of assumption that you know what it is. And we'll see if anybody wants to share what their understanding of inspiration, their experience of inspiration has been. There are no wrong answers. What has inspiration been for you? Anybody care to share their experience of inspiration? I'm looking for one brave individual. Thank you so much. She's hired.
Sweet.
Is it on?
Yeah. the first thing that came to my mind was like the first time I saw the Dalai Lama in person.
Mm-hmm.
It was like Losar, Tibetan New Year's. It was in Dharamsala. And, just seeing him was one thing, but then there was such a the whole crowd was so energized. So I think my like physical sense of inspiration is like that sense of energy, like an uplift in spirits.
Mm-hmm. Where in your body?
Like the whole thing just kind of felt tingly and charged up with
charged
energy.
up. Okay. Yeah. So you had a tingly and charged up, and was there a cognitive element to it?
Not much.
So tingly and charged up, but not much of a cognitive element. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was just like, woo! But there was no, in that moment, if you had said, would you like to do this amazing and difficult thing? I would have said yes.
Yeah.
But I didn't have some sense.
So some urge even to follow. Okay.
To follow or to do.
To do, yeah. So anybody else have any sharings on what their experience of inspiration is?
I could not think of a specific example, but I know when I'm inspired to do something and I do it, an energy arises to do it that was not available otherwise. But I can't think of a
when you're been inspired to do, there's a certain kind of energy. Physical energy. And do you know where do you feel that energy?
No, it means I can wake up in the morning and do it.
Okay, so you can wake up.
Anybody? That's an example.
Yeah.
But it gets a priority.
Becomes a priority.
And then the other thing I thought of when Claire mentioned the Dalai Lama, as I had the opportunity once in Dharamsala to shake hands with him. And I've heard you mention this from other people. It's like up close and personal. It's like to him, this close. To look in his face and his eyes is like looking into the depth of compassion.
Yeah.
And I don't think
so how does that affect you?
I don't think that's ever left me about developing.
Right. And how did it affect you?
Well, I mean, kind of getting to go meet the Dalai Lama felt like an energetic high.
And in your body, do you have some sense of where it impacted you?
In the heart.
In your heart? And what did you feel in your heart?
Some kind of connection.
A sense of connection. Okay, thank you. Yes.
I can't help but agree with what some of the other people have said about feeling energized. And I also feel a little nervous speaking in groups. So
you feel
a little nervous.
Speaking
in groups.
Thank you for being willing to be nervous. I feel nervous too.
But something that hasn't been shared that feels really true in my experience of inspiration is a sense of weight in my body, like a sense of feeling settled and a bit tranquil. I think about the first time I met my therapist, who I've worked with off and on for the last 11 years. Also think about the first time I met Chetsuma Tenzin Palmo, and there being a sort of energetic settling in the body.
Okay. Well, Marisa?
This past week, my good friend was in town. She's my main artistic collaborator, and she's just a riot. She's just so much fun, and the kind of flow of creative ideas, just like it's like exponential with another human being, in which I have this kind of rapport. And so we were exchanging ideas, and I just felt like kind of just the sense of like flooded with excitement, and there's a build. So for me, I felt really inspired, because not only was there like this sense of mirroring and resonance, but there was a sense of like velocity and moving forward. So it's almost like in my body, there's just this ramp up. that can kind of feel almost like it can get out of hand when I'm that excited about an idea and that connection with another person. But it feels almost like the energy sort of starts to stack and build like a ladder, and it's my mind feels very dynamic and kind of, so it's both felt like kind of a lot of cognitive motion and a physical lightness that is sort of continues to build.
And where in your body?
I mean, since it's dynamic, so there is a bit. I feel more of it in my core, but it does feel somewhat full-bodied. And then my heart also feels this the contact. I think somebody else was talking about this. The sense of contact and aliveness.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to retire the microphone at this point. So, I always prepare like 12 pages of material to talk about, and then something else gets inspired. There's a wonderful gentleman named Jason Siff, S-I-F-F, who's written a really nice book. It's called Unlearning Meditation. And it's kind of like the un-Buddha Buddha, the un-Buddhist Buddhist, the un-Dawn Mountain, by which I mean, if you read Jason, it's kind of, you'll want to forget about everything you ever learned about Buddhism. And if you can both do that and participate in Buddhism, it's a wonderful mix. So what's Jason's main point, and how does it relate to inspiration? And everything else I wanted to say now in 16 minutes. We're here, and this morning we'll practice some meditation. And there are a lot of structures that we offer by way of teaching and practices. And every structure can both be helpful and liberating, and it can become encrusting and limiting. And I was contemplating on the way over that emotion, the way one of the authors I've read on this, Richard Schwader, who's a cultural psychologist at the University of Chicago. I'm not going to be quoting it exactly, but it's something occurs, and you'll see that it's relevant to the descriptions you've shared of inspiration. Something occurs and it impacts your body, it impacts your mind, and there's usually an action tendency associated with an emotion. So it's something occurring in body and mind and some sort of action tendency. It doesn't mean that an emotion always involves action, but there's a tendency, there's a movement towards some kind of action. One of the places that most of us are challenged in our culture is in experiencing in our bodies. Even if the two extremes that we often see in our culture are people who get very, very heady, and there it's obvious they seem kind of out of touch with their bodies. But there are also people who can be very, very emotional, and if you were to try to stop them and ask them what are they feeling in their bodies, even they may not be able to tell you. They may have a lot of emotion, they may be crying, they may be screaming, they may be angry, but if you say, what are you feeling? They might not have a reflective awareness of what's happening in their bodies. How does this tie into inspiration and Buddhism? Most of you, in describing inspiration, talked about there is an effect in your body that is quite palpable. And then for some of you, there may have been thoughts or some orientation towards the person, some interest in the person, some interest in activity, or a lot of thoughts. Why did I bring in Jason Siff? Because a lot of people will think that Buddhist practice is what we're going to do at 11 o'clock, and it is. But really deeply, we can say that Buddhist practice is knowing your experience. It's a very, very simple phrase, but it has an enormous amount of depth. And one of the places most of us are challenged is in knowing our emotional experience, which includes awareness of our physical experience, our bodily experience. True moment-to-moment Buddhist practice involves a willingness to really be sensitive to what we're experiencing moment to moment, all of the time, and recognizing that really if we spend any of the skills at self-reflection that we develop in more structured practices, such as developing concentration or developing some kind of insight practice, that is brought to bear in our ordinary day-to-day experience. And so when we're inspired, we should be inspired, and at the same time, it'd be very, very important to know what we're experiencing when we're inspired. What is happening in our body? What is happening in our mind? What am I oriented towards doing? So David Brooks had this very, very interesting editorial. I guess it's this is April 11th, so it's a handful of Sundays ago. It's called The Moral Bucket List. And I'm not going to go into depth about it right now because I've got so much I want to cram into now 10 minutes. But he talks about resume values and eulogy values. And the resume values are kind of skills and things that you would take to a job interview, and eulogy values happen to be those that might be mentioned at your funeral. For those of you who've arrived a bit late, we're about to enter the 5th lunar month, which in the Tibetan calendar is called Sagadawa, and it's the month where Buddha's birth, death, and enlightenment is celebrated. And there's a lot of worship and prayer and a lot of renewal of inspiration with respect to the Buddha's life and Buddha's teachings and the Buddhist community. So it occurred to me to talk about inspiration. And it seems that when we're talking about inspiration vis-a-vis the Buddha and the teachings and the lineage of teachings into our teachers and the teachings themselves and the spiritual community, all of us who are interested, in terms of what David Brooks is talking about, these are eulogy values in a way that somehow when we think of somebody who's really inspired us, there's something in their character that we want to inspire. I did look up the etymology of that. I kind of knew what it was. But it really had to do historically with breathing in something spiritual, something divine, that you're taking in the spirit of something divine. And we do live in a disenchanted universe, thanks to Descartes and Newton and everybody who followed in the scientific community. And that creates a bit of a challenge for all of us, because we, especially with respect to religious authority figures, our bumper sticker is challenge or question authority. And whether you buy that or think you buy it or not, we've grown up in this culture and have lived in this culture, and question authority is part and parcel, and it's a great part and parcel of our cultural tradition. It's terrific in terms of what it's brought us in terms of science. But it can create some obstacles by way of a kind of tender-hearted appreciation that is a bit of a skill set that many of us in the modern West find a little bit challenging. I've had occasion to be around Tibetans, and especially some old funky Tibetans, and also around, let's say, Vietnamese who have been visiting with some of our Tibetan teachers. And the tender, open-hearted devotion that they bring to religious teachers, religious figures, and just the whole venture. It'd be instructive for some of you if you've never gone, like to maybe visit a Thai or a Vietnamese or Chinese Buddhist temple, just to get some flavor. And actually, the smaller and the funkier, the better, because there maybe the people are kind of more into their culture and less, in a way, westernized and acculturated. And it's beautiful. It's different. It's different from the way we're wired, and you can just see it. You could see it if you went down to Mexico and went to probably a Catholic service, frankly. Bit of the same thing. And it's a loveliness. I mean, I just get chills thinking about it. It's a lovely, lovely sweetness that's inspiring, worthy of seeing and maybe learning something from. So I thought it would also be critical to at least say a few inspiring things about Buddha. We're going to talk about Buddha's life story on the third Tuesday of May. That will be the teaching for the third Tuesday of May. But three things that maybe some of you know and maybe some of you don't know, but I think they're all quite noteworthy. And I was struggling with how to order them, but given the demographics of the audience, I've got my ideas sorted out. So the first is that he created an order of professional religious women, which, this week I happened to notice there was a headline, I think it was in the Times, about some women trying to gain entry to some of the Hindu temples. So even to this day, women can't get into certain parts of the sanctuaries in India. So, there's certainly a lot of talk now, and with probably Hillary Clinton being the presumptive nominee in the Democratic Party, there's going to be a revisiting of feminism. And I'm not here to do any politics with anybody, but, I grew up in around an Orthodox Jewish community where seating of men and women was separate. And certainly within that community, there wouldn't be any religious professionals who were women. So going back to Buddha lived 563 BC to 483, might be a little debate about that. But giving women a kind of professional religious organization was quite revolutionary. And it's not to say it's been perfect. Don't want to idealize it beyond the point of reality, but and religious Buddhist women are still seeking a higher level of equality, but there is some professional capacity to be a professional religious woman, a teacher, a leader. And certainly in Tibetan Buddhism, there have been some remarkable women teachers. Anne and I are currently reading I read at night, the biography of Sarah Kondo, autobiography, that Sarah Jacoby has written. And it's quite a startling and amazing tale of a woman leader, teacher in 20th century Tibet, who, just to use the vernacular, had a lot of chops. I mean, she just was a brave religious leader, but very, very powerful and very dynamic and very significant. So that was one thing, creating an order of religious women. The second was Buddha created probably what was the first world missionary religion. If you look at Indian religions, they all stayed in India. But Buddha explicitly told his disciples to go forth into the world out of sympathy and compassion. And the third, we're down to about 1 minute, and I may say more of this on the third Tuesday of May, is that he didn't observe the caste system in India. And that's a bit of a complicated story to describe for us in America because we're a land of equality. And we believe that everybody's born with a blank slate. Thank you, John Locke. But in India, at least traditionally, and it's been worked on, but it still somewhat obtains, if you were born a shoemaker, you were a shoemaker, your children were shoemakers, your grandchildren were shoemakers, and unto death do us part, multi-generational, you were shoemakers. And there was a lot of religious justification for that and religious even practice around that. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu classic, there's a lot of rationalization of what's called karma yoga, basically do what is your karma or your duty without attachment. And essentially that was a socially conservative maintenance of the caste system. And there may be a certain beauty to it, and but also, from our perspective, with the value of freedom, the Buddha not adhering to that system, and certainly within his professional religious organization, being completely democratic, it was kind of earth-shattering in that time and place. So that was the morning talk on Buddhism. And we'll just take maybe a minute or two break, and then we'll have our morning practice. Thank you all for coming early.